I was 9 years old when my mother kicked my father out of the house. Back then, I didn't understand what was happening. One day he was there, sitting in his recliner, beer in hand, yelling at the news like the anchors owed him money, and the next, his stuff was in trash bags on the lawn, and he was yelling at my mom while I watched through the crack of my bedroom door, clutching my Transformers toy like it could protect me from whatever storm was rolling in. He called her a bitch, a liar, and worse. She stood there, stone-faced, arms crossed. She didn't yell back. She didn't flinch. I think that's what scared me the most. How calm she was while everything around us was falling apart. He got in his truck, tires screaming as he sped off into the night, and I didn't see him again for years. For a long time I blamed her, not out loud, never to her face, but inside I resented her. She never explained why. She just told me, "One day, you'll understand," and left it at that. And I hated that answer. It felt like a locked door with no key. Growing up without a dad was hard. At school, Father's Day came with crafts and cards and awkward glances from teachers who knew my situation but didn't know how to handle it. My mom worked 2 jobs. She was always tired, always stressed, and though she tried her best, there were nights when I'd hear her crying in her bedroom, thinking I was asleep. Fast forward 20-something years. I'm 39 now, married, 1 kid, stable job. I'd all but stopped thinking about my father. He became a ghost, someone who used to exist, like a forgotten side character in the early chapters of my life. Then I got a call from a lawyer. "Mr. Baines," he said, "I'm sorry to inform you that your father has passed away." There was a long pause on the line. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything, really. Just blank. "He left something for you. A box." I didn't want it. I almost told the guy to toss it, burn it, donate it, whatever. But something in me, some morbid curiosity said, what if there's an answer inside? So I had it mailed to me. It arrived a week later. A dusty, beat-up lockbox with a dent in the side and my name scratched into the metal like a last-minute afterthought. No key. I stared at it for a good 10 minutes before grabbing a screwdriver and prying it open. Inside were photos, letters, receipts, a camcorder tape, and a single Polaroid that made my blood run cold. It was my mom, young, probably in her 20s, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing. She looked happy, freer than I'd ever seen her, even in the old family photos. The man had his arm around her waist, fingers resting just a little too familiarly on her hip. And behind them, standing a few feet away, was my father, watching. Not smiling, not part of the picture, watching. I dug deeper into the box, hands trembling, each item adding another crack to the image I'd held onto all my life. Letters from private investigators, bank withdrawals, audio cassettes labeled with dates. One had a note taped to it. If you're reading this, then you're old enough to know. My hands were shaking as I popped the tape into an old player I borrowed from a friend who collects vintage junk. I hit play, and then I heard my father's voice, calm, collected, cold. "I tried to tell you, she made me the villain. But you need to understand what really happened that night. It started long before that night she threw me out." His voice continued, crackling through the static. "You were too young to see it. She made sure of that. But I wasn't perfect either, I'll admit it. I drank too much. I worked too much. I was angry, but I wasn't blind." He took a deep breath on the tape. I could hear it, that slight wheeze in his lungs that I remembered from when he'd sit too long without his inhaler. Then he kept talking. I started noticing little things. The phone ringing, and her stepping outside to take the call. Her perfume getting stronger when she'd come home late, like she was trying to cover up something. She started locking her phone, changing passwords on the computer. Hell, even putting a new lock on the drawer where we used to keep the bills. That's when I hired someone. I paused the tape. I didn't want to keep listening. A part of me already knew what he was going to say next, but I didn't want it to be true. I wanted to believe Mom was the hero of the story, the strong one who saved us from a man who couldn't control his temper. But when I hit play again, all that started to fall apart. I followed her once. She said she had to work late, some emergency shift, but I watched her pull into a hotel parking lot instead. She sat in the car for a few minutes. He showed up. That same guy from the photo. They kissed, right there in front of everyone, like they had nothing to hide. Like I didn't even exist. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear a dog barking faintly in the background. Maybe it was his, maybe it was someone else's, but his voice returned, lower now, bitter. She made me the villain. She told you I was dangerous, that I couldn't be trusted. She painted herself as the victim, and I let her, because I loved you too much to drag you through the mess. I figured you'd find out one day, or maybe you wouldn't, but I wanted you to have the truth, my truth, before it was too late. I sat there for hours, sifting through the rest of the contents in that box. There were bank statements showing transfers to someone named L. Martinez. I'd later find out it was the guy from the photo, a man who vanished just 2 years after my dad was kicked out. No forwarding address, no digital footprint. The more I uncovered, the more the image of my mother, the woman I'd defended all my life, started to crack. It wasn't just the affair. It was how methodical it all was. She'd been setting him up, financially isolating him, keeping records that painted her in a better light. There were documents she must have hidden from me, ones Dad had somehow kept or recovered, court papers with falsified claims, her handwriting, but none of it matched what really happened. And then I found the journal. Not his, hers. It was tucked in a manila envelope marked for him, if he ever asks. It wasn't dated, and it wasn't addressed, but the tone. It was her. There was no mistaking it, and what I read inside changed everything. The journal wasn't long, maybe 30 or 40 pages, but each one was soaked in the kind of raw emotion that doesn't lie. Not the kind you put on for court or for friends or even your kid. This was someone talking to herself, confessing things no one was ever meant to hear. The first few pages were angry, resentful. She talked about how trapped she felt, how my dad never looked at her the way he used to, how the house felt like a prison. She wrote about the loneliness, the way she could scream inside and no one would hear her. She wrote about the man, Luis Martinez. Not just some fling, not a one-night escape. According to her, he was the only person who listened, who made her feel seen. He was charming, dangerous, the complete opposite of my father. He was a storm that pulled her in, and she didn't fight it. But the tone shifted halfway through the journal. That's when the fear started creeping in. She wrote about how Luis changed, how the charm started to feel rehearsed, how he became possessive, jealous. He'd show up unannounced, new things she never told him. She mentioned finding her car keys in the wrong spot, her bedroom window cracked open after she swore she closed it. Then there was this one entry, only a few lines, but it stopped me cold. He said if I left my husband for him, he'd take care of everything. Said he had dirt on John. I didn't ask what kind. I was too afraid of the answer. But now I think he's using it against me. That was my dad, John Baines, the man I grew up resenting, the man I was beginning to realize had been protecting me from a truth I wouldn't have been able to handle. She never mentioned what Luis had on my dad. But as I pieced everything together, it started to make a twisted kind of sense. Luis was playing both sides. He knew about my mom's unhappiness, probably manipulated it. He blackmailed her with whatever info he had on my dad, maybe even fabricated it, and he used that leverage to isolate her, to control her. That's when I found the hotel receipts. Not for 2 people, 3. For almost a year, Luis had been meeting with another woman, someone named Kay. The last receipt was dated 2 days before my mom threw my dad out. I don't know if she ever found out, but I knew I had to. I confronted her. It had been a few months since the box arrived. I'd been quiet, distant. My wife said I was acting off. I told her bits and pieces, but I needed answers directly from the source. So I took the box, the journal, the tape, and I drove 4 hours to my childhood home where she still lived alone. When she opened the door and saw what I was holding, she didn't say anything. Just stepped aside, let me in, and sat down at the kitchen table without a word. I put the box between us. "What really happened?" I asked. She didn't look at me right away. But when she did, there were tears already welling in her eyes. "You found it," she said. I nodded. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. And then she said something I'll never forget. "I tried to protect you from him, but in the end, I should have been protecting you from me." She looked older now, smaller somehow. Her shoulders hunched under an invisible weight she'd been carrying for decades. I thought I'd come here angry. Thought I'd demand explanations, throw her lies in her face, ask her how she could live with herself. But when she said those words, "protect you from me," all I felt was cold. I slid the journal across the table. She didn't touch it, just stared at it, like it was radioactive. "I need to know," I said, "all of it." She took a long breath and finally began to speak, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Luis was never supposed to stay in our lives. He was supposed to be a wake-up call. I thought if I could feel something again, just once, I'd come back to your father and fix everything. But it didn't stop. He didn't let it stop." I watched her eyes. She wasn't performing now. No dramatics, just raw, tired truth. "He knew everything, John, about your father's business, the deals, the clients, the cash under the table. I didn't even know half of it. But Luis, he had files, photos. He said if I didn't get your father out of the house, he'd go to the IRS, to the police. He'd bury him. He even had things about you, your school records. He knew your schedule, who your friends were. He knew when you were alone." I clenched my fists. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because I was complicit, John. I was sleeping with him. I gave him access. I let him into our lives. No one would have believed me. He kept saying that I owed him, that we had to do what he said or you and your father would both disappear." She finally touched the journal then, one finger brushing the edge like it burned. "So, I made a deal. I kicked your father out. Told him it was because of his drinking, his absences, his anger. And it wasn't a lie. Not completely. He had his faults. But I exaggerated everything. I made him the monster. I told the neighbors, the lawyers, even your school counselor. I built a wall around you with lies." "And Luis?" I asked. She went silent for a moment, then looked up at me. "He didn't want the family. He wanted control. He wanted me. But once your father was gone, he got bored. He disappeared with money I didn't know he'd taken. Sold off those files, probably. A few weeks later, he was gone. Just gone." I thought about the receipts, the woman he'd been meeting. "You were never his only one." She laughed, short, hollow. I figured that out too late. I looked around the kitchen. Everything looked the same as it did when I was 9. The same ceramic rooster on the windowsill. The same worn-out chair at the end of the table, Dad's chair. How could she have sat here every day with this truth? I hated him, I said. For 30 years, I hated him. I know, she said. And he let you, because he thought it was better than hating me. We sat there in silence for what felt like an hour. When I finally left, I didn't take the box. I left it there with her. I didn't know if I'd ever come back. But the thing is, stories like this, they don't stay buried, especially when you start digging. Because a few weeks later, I got a letter. No return address, just a single sheet of paper, and on it, typed in clean block letters, were 4 words. You're not done yet. The paper was crisp, fresh. It hadn't come from the box. Someone had mailed this after I found everything. It wasn't a coincidence. My heart pounded in my chest as I flipped the paper over. Nothing. Just those 4 words. You're not done yet. For a few moments, I just stood there, gripping it too tightly, like it might explain itself if I squeezed hard enough. I checked the envelope again. No postmark. It had been hand-delivered. Someone had walked this to my mailbox. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying everything. My dad's quiet shame, my mom's confession, Louisa's ghost vanishing into thin air. And now this. Who knew? Who still cared? The next morning, I called a friend from college, Mason. He worked in cybersecurity and owed me a few favors from back when we were roommates, and I covered for him more times than I could count. Can you track a printer? I asked him. He laughed at first. That's specific. I'm serious, I said, and I told him what happened. 3 days later, he got back to me. The printer that had made the letter, a Canon inkjet, basic, retail. But he found something else. There was a faint watermark in the corner of the page that didn't come from any printer setting. It was embossed, like an impression in the paper itself. A small symbol. Looked like a key inside a triangle. Mason sent me a high-res image of it. You ever seen something like that before? He asked. I hadn't, until I remembered the journal. I drove back to my mother's house the same day. When I arrived, the front door was cracked open. I stepped inside slowly, calling out for her. No answer. The living room looked fine. Kitchen, untouched. But when I got to the study, I saw it. The journal was gone. The box had been emptied. Every photo, every receipt, every tape. Gone. Someone had come looking, and they found it. I checked the drawers. Everything else was in place. Just the box was missing. My mother's car was still in the driveway. Her purse, phone, keys, all untouched. But she was nowhere in the house. I called the police, filed a missing person report. They took my statement, asked me the usual questions. I didn't mention the letter. I didn't mention Luis. Not yet. Something told me this went deeper than just a runaway lover from 30 years ago. I went home that night and printed the key and triangle symbol, stared at it for hours. Then it clicked. There was a place my dad used to take me when I was little, a storage unit, off the freeway, near the industrial district. I remember he always said it was where he kept business stuff. I hadn't thought about it in years. But one time, when I was 12, I snuck a look at his keychain. One of the keys had a triangle etched on it, just like the watermark. The next morning, I drove out there. The storage facility was still standing, bare bones, steel doors, old keypad at the front gate. I gave the name John Baines. The guy at the front desk scanned the system, nodded, and handed me a clipboard. Unit 117. I walked down the row of units. The place smelled like dust and oil. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting for decades. The door groaned open. Inside was a single metal filing cabinet and a chair. On the chair was a tape recorder and another note. "You're close, but you still don't know what he did." The tape was already loaded, so I hit play, and I heard my father's voice. "I never wanted you to find this, son. But if you did, it means you're in danger." The sound of my father's voice after all those years hit me like a truck. I hadn't heard it since I was a teenager, and now, hearing it so clearly, measured, calm, like he was just across the room, froze me in place. "I never wanted you to find this, son. But if you did, it means you're in danger." He paused. You could hear him breathing like he was trying to decide how much to say. "I tried to keep you out of it. Out of all of it. You were a kid. Innocent. But you're not a kid anymore, and if you've made it this far, then you deserve to know the truth." I sat down in the chair, barely breathing. "Luis didn't just blackmail your mother. He worked for a group, one that cleans up messes for powerful people, politicians, CEOs, people who can't afford loose ends. And I was a loose end." My heart dropped. "That's why I left. Your mother made it easier by pushing me out. But the truth is, I was already halfway gone. I'd seen the signs. My accounts were being watched. My contacts disappearing. People who owed me favors stopped picking up their phones. I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for me too." The tape clicked slightly, like he'd stopped it and then restarted it. "Luis offered a deal. One I didn't take. So they made me a scapegoat. Planted things. Set me up to fall. You saw what it looked like. A drunk, a liar, a broken man. That's what they wanted you to believe. That way, if I disappeared, no one would ask questions. No one did." Another pause. "But there's something they didn't count on." A deep breath on the tape. The voice steadier now. "I kept everything. Names, locations, code words. They're locked away. And if you're hearing this, it means someone's trying to find them again. Probably through you." A creak on the recording, like he was shifting in his chair. "There's a locker, Union Terminal downtown. Locker 53. The key is inside the filing cabinet in front of you. Don't trust the police. Don't talk to your mother anymore. And whatever you do, don't let them know you're onto them." The tape stopped. Silence. I stood up, legs numb, heart thudding in my chest. Opened the cabinet. The key was there. Simple brass with a red tag. Locker 53. I looked back at the recorder. There was a final piece of paper taped to the bottom. 7 words. "If you go, don't go alone." It wasn't over. It was just starting. The air at Union Terminal was thick with that strange blend of history and movement. Old marble columns towered over travelers dragging wheeled suitcases, people staring at their phones, security guards pretending to be more attentive than they were. Nobody looked twice at me. Just another guy with too much on his mind. I moved through the terminal like I belonged there, but every step felt heavier. My father's words echoed in my head. "If you go, don't go alone." But I was alone. Because how do you bring someone into something like this? How do you explain that your dad might have been hunted by a secret organization tied to blackmail, murder, and God knows what else? Locker 53 wasn't far, a steel cube among hundreds. I waited until no one was looking, slipped in the brass key, and opened it slowly. Inside was a black leather bag. I didn't open it right there, I couldn't. Too exposed. I shoved it into my backpack and walked out of the terminal with my head down and heart hammering. Back at my apartment, behind locked doors and drawn blinds, I finally unzipped it. There were 3 things inside. A stack of old photographs, some of them grainy surveillance shots, others more recent. In most of them, the same man appeared. Middle-aged, graying, always near someone powerful, always in the background. A thumb drive labeled with a single word, Vindicta, and a notebook. Black cover, no markings. Inside, pages and pages of notes. Dates, names, flight numbers, wire transfers, hotel bookings, passwords, even drawings of buildings I recognized. Corporate headquarters, government offices, news stations. My father had been tracking them. There was one name circled multiple times. Daniel Cresswell. I Googled it. CEO of a lobbying firm in D.C., but the search barely scratched the surface. He'd been everywhere. Military contracts, pharmaceuticals, defense funding. A power broker. Untouchable. One more search told me something else. 3 months ago, Cresswell's son died of an overdose. The news called it tragic and unexpected. But in my father's notes there were arrows connecting the son's name to Luis's and to my mother. What the hell had she gotten caught up in? Suddenly, I understood why the box disappeared. Why she never really talked about what happened. She wasn't just a victim. She was in it. A knock at the door jolted me back. 3 slow taps. I froze. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You have something that belongs to us. I didn't answer. A second message. Be smart. We only want what's ours. We don't need to hurt anyone. I felt it then. Cold, rising dread. Not just for me. For everyone I cared about. So I did something stupid. I uploaded the contents of the thumb drive. Sent it to 5 people I trusted most. People who wouldn't ask questions. Included a message. If anything happens to me, leak this everywhere. And then I ran. I've changed my name twice since then. I keep moving, motel to motel, watching my back, and I keep digging. Because my father was right, this thing goes deep. Every time I think I've reached the bottom, another piece falls into place. Another name, another lie, and I still don't know exactly what he did. But I'm going to find out. And when I do, they're all going to pay.